and welcome to Edison Open House Future Transport 2021. Well, we've got a treat for you now. We are going to hear about the Faraday Institution. Now, the Faraday Institution was set up in 2017 as a delivery partner for the Faraday Battery Challenge. Now, the Faraday Battery Challenge is funded through the UK government's Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. And what the Faraday Institution does is combine research, innovation and scale-up facilities for batteries. We've got its CEO, Pam Thomas, here to talk about the Faraday Institution, but also to give us an overview of the whole battery arena and the technologies that are upcoming. Pam, hello.
Hello, Vivian, and really great to be here with you to discuss the Faraday Institution as part of the Faraday Battery Challenge.
So tell me all about Faraday. How was it set up? Obviously in the name of somebody who is hugely famous in the UK and across the world for his research in this area, but tell me about why Faraday was set up.
So the Faraday Institution is the UK's flagship research organisation for research into electrochemical storage, or battery science, if you will, to you and me and everyone else. And it was set up in 2017 as an independent charity, and it was the brainchild of a number of world-class, world-leading academics in the UK. And it happened along at the same time in the thinking of the Automotive Council around electrification of vehicles. And they joined together and became part of the UK's Faraday Battery Challenge, which you correctly say, Vivian, was part of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund at the time. And now this whole challenge is a tripartite endeavour between us at the research end in the Faraday Institution, the collaborative research and development programmes, which are led through Innovate UK, and then also the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre, which is a prototype manufacturing factory set up in the West Midlands near Coventry. So those three elements are the Faraday Battery Challenge.
So research, innovation and scale up, essentially.
Essentially, yes.
Now, how did you come to this role, Pam?
So I'm been in academia for many years. I am a functional materials scientist, so materials that do things that can be applied in particularly what I worked on is something called piezoelectrics. And they're materials that if you put a stress on them, they produce an electric response, or if you put electric field on them, they change shape. So there's lots of different applications for those in memory devices and in the automotive industry, actually, for actuators in systems, turbocharged systems. So I came from that background. I've been an academic researcher myself for nearly 40 years now. And I then went into academic management. I was the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research at the University of Warwick for 5 years. And then as I was looking to see what I would do next after that, this opportunity became available. I'd been on the Faraday Institution board previously, so I knew about the organisation, how important the work the Faraday Institution is doing regarding batteries and electrification of mobility in the net zero world that we are endeavouring to produce. And so I thought it was incredibly exciting, and that if I could bring my scientific and management experience to bear in leading the organisation, that would be a perfect role for me. So that's why I went for it.
Now, academia and translation into product doesn't have a particularly good history, at least not in the UK. How do you counter that kind of criticism?
So I think there's a huge amount of ingenuity and fantastic science in the UK, and a lot of it is translated into great product, great innovation. I can think, I've recently done the REF exercise for the University of Warwick, and we have impact.
Explain for our non-UK listeners and viewers what REF is.
So the REF is the Research Excellence Framework. It comes around every 7 years, although people would say it seems much shorter than that. It is actually only every 7 years. And we look at assessing the excellence of the research in more than 100 of our universities in the UK. That's by publications and scholarly works, but importantly, it's also through non-academic impact. So it's where research has translated from the lab or the department into something for social good, economic good, generation of jobs. So it's non-academic impact. And certainly looking at what just has come out of one university, and this would be replicated across the sector, there are so many academics who've spun out companies, they've patented their work, spun out companies or licensed their technology. There's a huge amount of this work going on. And I think perhaps the UK, in looking at itself, looks back at some of its more public failures in this regards and forgets actually there's new generations of academics who are coming through and seeing this as part of their normal endeavour to take their work and translate it out into the marketplace. So I think that maybe we're not bad at it, but perhaps we're bad at talking about it and really communicating that to the wider public at large.
Now, what's interesting about Faraday is that commercial markets aren't always able to fund solutions that are good for the public. Mm-hmm. And how do you use public funds to create solutions?
Yes, so I do think we see that there is a difficulty in getting something to a really great stage in the laboratory, and then actually then going to market. There's a gap there. And I think what we're trying to do in the Faraday Institution is to bridge that gap using public funds in a smart way to put consortia together with the Faraday Institution as that neutral broker between universities, and collaboration between universities is a big signature of our programs instead of just straight competitiveness. So being that honest broker between our university partners and our industrial partners to look at how we can use our funding to bridge that gap. So we haven't got it completely solved yet. And I think our 3 years of experience to date, and it is only 3 years that we've been running our research programs, we'll take that 3 years of experience to date into our next proposal for Faraday Institution Phase 2 and look at exactly how we can put more funding into that space. At the moment, what we're doing is making sure we've got the people there who can take the work of the academics and do that translation, do that important work around patenting, putting a business plan together, reaching out to industrial partners and giving funding for industrial fellowships, short projects, which we call sprint fellowships, entrepreneurial fellowships, where Faraday funding is used in an agile fashion to allow these to seed activities that will build. And we've got very good examples of that. There's a startup called QDOT, for example, where we've used one of our entrepreneurial fellowships to put somebody in place to take the ideas that were coming out of the research and put them into a startup. And that startup now is employed another 7 people and is going great guns in raising its own capital through venture capital. So we've bridged that stage of lab to venture capital.
And also public funding allows you to do things that would not be commercially attractive.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. So for example, there are really important subjects that need to be tackled as part of any battery research portfolio. We have in our portfolio a large project on recycling. It's called RELIB. So if I say that, I'm referring to the recycling project. It's led out of the University of Birmingham and it has a number of partners in it, as all our big projects do. So that one, for example, is really trying to lead the way in how one might change how we do recycling in the future. They've got a robotic facility where they're looking at disassembling old cells using robots rather than using human beings. It will be an unsafe and nasty process, so better to get robots to do it for sure. Now, that's not going to make any money for anybody yet. So in supporting that, we're supporting something that is not ripe for commercialization, in the sense that it's not going to make anyone a profit for a while, but has to be there for the future. We know that, we've learned that already, that we can't just go around creating technologies without the capacity to clear them up afterwards.
And actually recycling is becoming an ever bigger issue, and not simply because of the environmental concerns that there are around, for instance, mining of lithium.
Yes, that's absolutely right, Vivian. And I think as we go forward, we are all thinking all the time about those issues. I mean, there are ethical issues around where materials are sourced, where they are mined. The one that is most public, I think, for battery materials is actually around the production of cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there have been concerns about child mining and so on. And then also the concern that if that sort of artisanal small-scale mining is stopped, you impoverish whole communities. So that has to be looked at properly in the round. Within our projects in the Faraday Institution, we're looking at alternative chemistries. So we're looking at battery chemistries that don't need cobalt. So that's another way of doing it, is to look at alternative chemistries. We've got two large projects on new cathode materials. The cathode is one element of the battery, one terminal of the battery, if you will. So we're looking at alternative chemistries for that. We're also looking at alternative chemistries that are based on sodium ions. So sodium is much more abundant than lithium. It's much easier to get at. There's loads of it in the sea, for example, in sodium chloride, salt. So we're looking at those battery technologies, but to be fair, they're unlikely to be what will power our electric vehicles to go to work. They're much more likely to be battery technologies for stationary applications, like feeding into the national grid, like storing the energy that we make through renewable sources, and maybe also for perhaps where we don't need such high performance vehicles in other parts of the developing world, because they'll be lower cost as well. So there's a whole suite of things one might look at in looking at the whole energy ecosystem, how batteries will play a part in different areas of that. And we can use the appropriate chemistries, always keeping in mind recycling, ethical matters, and pollution in terms of how the elements are mined from the ground.
And of course, the other thing that is a particular concern is the way that at the moment the global supply is dominated by China, and that's an issue in itself.
Yes, that is an issue that all of us in the rest of the world need to consider. I mean, there's two sides to that, of course. There's the fact that we need resilience of supply of critical materials. That's one side of it. But also the practice of just shipping off all the dirty things to be dismantled and recovered in China is not a solution either. They're doing a lot of the world's cleanup in a very zero carbon way at the moment, just burning things essentially. And we need to stop that. We need to look at that whole cycle in terms of resilience for ourselves and net zero carbon for the globally, not just in the UK.
As I'm talking to you, I suspect that our viewers are also thinking this. You know, there's so much more to a battery than just a battery, because there's all that, the whole life cycle to consider, its origins, its certification, all the other bits around it. And And actually, if the chemistry changes, as you say, then that's going to have implications for the mining industry, because if the automotive industries change what they want in a battery, then it's going to be difficult for the mining industry that take, 5, perhaps even 10 years lead time to prepare, if they're going to be caught unawares. So how does that all come together?
So I think that's a really important question, Vivian. I'm not an expert on mining, so I wouldn't answer for them, but clearly it's really important that the scientific and technological advances are aligned to what the mining industries and the materials industries can actually honour. There's no point inventing a clever battery in the lab that is just not going to be viable in terms of mining the raw materials. And then there's the manufacturing end as well. I mean, can it be manufactured at scale? How much will the current producers of batteries have to modify their production lines? Will they want to modify their production lines to adapt to new chemistry? Those can be very long lead times to get any new material in any application up to manufacture. And I think we need a proper acceleration with the right thinking wrapped around it in those areas too. It's all too easy to give a date by which things must change, but not so easy necessarily for every part of the chain to adapt in time. So I think there are huge considerations around all of this that are beyond just scientific. There's economic and political and techno-economic analyses that need to be done. That is happening, but the more we can embed those types of thinking into the scientific and technological endeavour, the better. And that's what we will do. I mean, looking to Faraday Institution Phase 2, we're looking at how we would embed all of that thinking in at the project level, so that every invention that's being made in the project has been sort of checked against these considerations. So we're not going off in a direction that ultimately is going to be of no benefit.
So Pam, you're in a unique position in the Faraday to oversee, to have this bird's eye view of all the new battery technologies coming up. You've already mentioned sodium. Anything else coming up that you think is particularly interesting?
Okay, so if I mention solid state batteries, this is the holy grail of many battery manufacturers. So it's not unique to us that we would be working on it. It's a holy grail for the battery industry, and that means that everything is solid state. So the cathode and the anode, the key parts of charging and discharging the battery, with the electrolyte in between. So that's the stuff in the middle. There's the lead acid in one of our car batteries currently, conventional car batteries. So all of those bits would be in the solid state. And that's, as I said, a holy grail. And one of the reasons for that is it's considered that it will be much safer. That in fact it's the electrolyte, which is currently liquid, is the flammable bit. So that would be very important. We're working on that, but then that's happening around the world. Areas that we're particularly focusing on, we're looking at lithium sulfur batteries. Now, lithium sulfur batteries are high power and they're relatively light in weight.
And weight is a big consideration, isn't it? Because batteries are hugely heavy, and that means that you need to site your well, and we'll talk about scaling in a minute, but your gigafactories needs to be close to your car plants, because the cost of transporting really heavy batteries is a huge consideration. Yes. But also actually for the design of the car or vehicle, you need to think about weight.
Yeah, so weight and size, so the volume and the weight, so those are called volumetric energy density and gravimetric energy density, are two enormous factors in considering what kind of battery you will use for what kind of application. So obviously if we're thinking of aeronautic applications, whether it's manned or unmanned, I mean putting something in the sky, we would want a battery that is much lighter in weight. And also, to get it up off the ground and overcome gravity, it needs to have a very high power density, so it can give a real thrust to that thing to get it up off the ground. And it being then safe, of course, is paramount. Now, I'm not talking about lithium sulfur batteries powering jumbo jets off the ground, but if we think of all the other things that go up in the sky, unmanned aircraft, drones, pseudo satellites that are up in the sky, and you know, managing all of our communications and our telecoms and so on, there's a large number of things where aeronautic batteries will be very important, let alone when we get to jumbo jets and so on, where actually we would see these types of batteries, lithium sulfur, as being the kind of batteries that power the electronics on board, rather than actually getting the aircraft off the ground.
What about in scale up? Because that's another one of your three legs.
Yes, so there is a UK Battery Innovation Industrialisation, Centre, which is in the West Midlands, and that was conceived as an £80 million manufacturing scale-up facility. So the idea is that one might go there with a new chemistry or a new design, and then look in that facility at the possibilities for scale up, where, you know, there are problems in scaling up, and to get a better idea of the costs of scaling up something from sort of bench scale, as it were, to larger scale. So that is run by Jeff Pratt, who was formerly of Nissan, and I wouldn't like to say further than that, but clearly it's really important that we have all of these legs, so that we can see how we could take an innovation at laboratory scale through to something that could then be considered by manufacturers, something they could put into their factory and run off of a production line. And I think this a manufacturing facility that we have is actually really admired in other parts of the world. I mean, Germany have a similar one, and the UK and the German industrialisation centres are talking quite a lot together at the moment to look at how best that can be done.
Pam, I wonder what you think is the biggest hurdle in the current batteries market to overcome for us to really reach a tipping point where, you know, electrification becomes much more simple.
Well, so there are a number of elements, I think, so I'll divide them up. So the first one I would think is personal acceptance of moving to a new technology, and I think we have always see this. One might analogize with the vaccine take-up, for example. There are behavioural attitudes, behavioural instincts at play in the consumer that have to be overcome. So that there is range anxiety with electric vehicles. For example, there's concern about safety, performance in general, and how long does it take to charge my vehicle? And will I be able to roll up at a charging point and find I can charge my vehicle with it, that it's available to me, and so on. And all of those anxieties, I mean, they're completely reasonable for people to have them. So there's a lot to do, both in the research in producing batteries that do charge faster, that do last longer, that are safer, and we already talked about those things. And then there are things around making sure that we have the correct infrastructure, that it is rolled up, that there is a charging point every 50 kilometers on the road, that I can charge my vehicle, whether it's a Tesla or, oh no, I can rock up and plug my vehicle in and charge it, and it's not going to take me 12 hours. We do need to have the infrastructure in place. It's not good enough just to have great batteries. We need to have the infrastructure. And that will mean also looking at our national grid infrastructure too, because if suddenly all of us are charging our vehicles, because we've got electric vehicles instead of going to the fuel station, that's a big demand on the grid as well. So we need to think about all of those things together.
I remember asking, I was recording a program, and I asked somebody who was at the National Grid what kept him awake at night, and he said a cheap electric car.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
you know, the impact on the National Grid would be enormous, and it is the infrastructure, as you say, that is really a critical point to overcome these issues about range anxiety. Are you doing anything in that, if I could call it that, an ancillary battery technologies, the kind of things where, you know, people can charge up more easily in places that are not at home?
Yes, so we are venturing into that space now. I think, as I said, we've only actually been doing our research for 3 years. So now we're sort of branching out from, you know, looking at essentially at the battery technology itself, the chemistry itself, to the wider scope. But actually, the Faraday Institution, one of its successes really has been its ability to influence policy and talk to government and other policymakers from the very start. So we have a series of Faraday Insights, so-called. There are 10 now that look at different aspects, including critical materials, including sort of the needs of the UK in economic terms for gigafactories and so on. So those are already out there. But now we're starting to do some projects on grid and infrastructure alongside the Energy Systems Catapult and other organisations, National Grid itself indeed, and other organisations that look after this kind of area, and bringing our battery insight to bear on that. So yes, and that's something I think we'll do even more in phase 2. We've had a very rapid startup since 2017-18 to get our major projects up and running, and now it's the right time to start expanding our thought into those other areas.
And how, the sort of killer question, how do you go about choosing the technologies or even the companies and people that you invest in? Because, you know, some things may seem extremely risky, but yet they might fail, but actually they might be the next big thing. So how do you go about choosing?
Yeah, so that is extremely difficult, and anybody who's been involved in scientific research in any sphere will recognise the difficulty of that. So I think in terms of our initial 10 large research programmes in the Faraday Institution's portfolio, we were guided by a set of industry targets around cost and energy density, life cycle predictability, and so on, that had been set out by the Automotive Council. So we started with those, and we put those as the headline figures, that we would have projects that could address at least 1 or 2 of these 8 targets that we had, and progress along the way to those improved specifications for the batteries. That was very automotive. I mean, it'd be fair to say we started off with an automotive bias, if you will. So we look, and because we're a research organisation, that's publicly funded, we looked for critical mass of research excellence that could be seen by the world as these are world leaders in their research, and we coalesced our programmes around those. But then we were also on a mission to multiply the size of the battery research community. So we've brought a lot of other people in, and now we have over 450 researchers working across our projects. I'm not dodging your question, I haven't got there yet. So that's how we chose our best research. And then we look continuously with embedded, focused experts on technology transfer and commercialisation on what can be pulled out from the discoveries in the laboratory and maybe has technological potential. And you have to be prepared to back a number of different things, some of which will fail, but you always get learning even out of the things that fail, and continually put small inputs, look at the right time when the time is right for big inputs of investment to try and take the idea forward. And it's natural that if you start with 10 examples, maybe you'll get 9 out of those 10 not coming to a large commercial advantage. Maybe there'll be small scale things that carry on. But I think we can only do our best in the sense of using the given understandings of how we translate from laboratory to commercial. And we are working with an expert panel that gives us considerable advice. We've got a very diverse board of experts from both the UK and particularly overseas, the US, and also the head of the European battery project, Euro 2030 Plus, is from Sweden. And we've got British Volt involved, we've got Johnson Matthey involved on our board. So we're continually getting this advice about where we should be focusing. Even so, it remains difficult, but I think we've created the conditions to do the best that we can.
And how does it fit in with government goals and targets that aren't being met by the commercial market?
Well, I wouldn't like to say which ones aren't being met by the commercial market, but we clearly fit as fairly and squarely in the target that the government has around elimination of internal combustion engines by 2035. I mean, our technology is completely focused on that. If nothing else, it will be addressing that. And obviously, with all the life cycle considerations and the ethical sourcing of materials and so on that we talked about previously, Vivian, that's looking at the net carbon zero by 2050, because we're actually looking to make our mining and manufacturing processes carbon free by that stage as well. I mean, they're not. I mean, the battery industry would already tell you that their processes are not carbon free yet, and the recycling has got some way to go in getting to a net zero.
Finally, Pam, are there any promising companies that you'd highlight for us, and why these particular ones?
So I picked out a couple. So obviously, British Volt's appearance in the UK is very exciting and important for us, because they would be a second battery manufacturer. We mustn't forget that we already have the Nissan Envision battery manufacturers in the UK already, but British Volt are a new entrant onto the scene, and we are in with them at the very beginning. And I think what they propose to have in their portfolio is extremely exciting. I won't speak further to it now in case I breach any confidences, but for us in the Faraday Institution, that they would come and possibly build their gigafactory in the northeast of England and have their associated engineering around that is a great opportunity. I also wanted to mention Nyobolt, which is a company looking at new battery chemistries. It's a spin out from Cambridge University and is led by one of our Faraday Institution Fast Start project leaders, Professor Claire Gray in Cambridge. They've got some very exciting plans for future expansion. They've been raising large amounts of venture capital, and we've had an industry fellow working in there from Coventry University actually, and that's a great collaboration on new battery chemistries. And then another one I'd like to mention is QDOT, which is a startup that's applying actually ideas from fusion science and how one manages the heat transfer around a tokamak, which is what is used to generate energy in nuclear fusion. And they've taken that thinking over to battery packs. And they're working with our multi-scale modelling project in Imperial College to have a particular new method of cooling high-powered batteries. And actually then these would be for aviation. So just those are just three examples of a very big entrant to the market, a spin out from Cambridge and a startup out of Oxford and Imperial College, where each of those, where we would interact with them as the Faraday Institution, they're all slightly different, but it's I think it's illustrating how we can be sort of the gateway for battery science in the UK in industrial interactions.
And what's fascinating about all of this is that it creates this critical mass of people, of researchers, of companies, all kind of clustering round to, you know, develop and innovate and scale. So Faraday, it seems to me, is already succeeding in its purpose of, you know, not only finding the technologies, but in then scaling them. And it's a ball that's really starting to roll at quite some considerable pace.